The Road Home, a contemporary exploration of the Buddhist path, written by Ethan Nichtern, read by Sen Naomi Kirst-Schultz. We are on Chapter 2, Part 2, Karma. Minding the Gap. Vulnerability and the Present Moment. You'd be hard-pressed to find a person who wouldn't agree that life would be better if we could each be more, quote-unquote, present. However, when we discuss why that's the case, even those of us who have been meditating a long time tend to get a bit vague in our explanations. There are actually quite a lot of reasons we want to be more present, more able to turn our attention at will to what is going on now. Often in the Shambhala teachings, we frame the importance of the present moment in terms of appreciating the vividness and aesthetic beauty of now. This is why the covers of many meditation books are filled with pictures of nature like autumn leaves falling onto a path, or a beautiful pond and trees. From the very simple point of view of appreciation, when we slow down and actually acknowledge the treasure trove of our sense perceptions, our experience deepens and we often almost instantly begin to feel more at home as an immense gratitude comes flooding back to us. When we learn to return our minds to our sense perceptions, experience takes on a priceless quality. Cocktails in Brooklyn have gotten increasingly expensive, but if you actually tasted each sip fully, they could charge $1,000 for a good margarita because the experience of flavor is that rich. And likewise, if we tasted each sip fully, we might not need to go grasping after another cocktail and another and another and another just to keep feeling good about ourselves. One margarita, fully experienced, might just be plenty. From the standpoint of sense perception, being present is about realizing that we have already inherited with our human anatomy an incredibly rich apparatus for appreciating our experience. If we can just learn how to be fully present for 5 more sensory experiences a day, the depth of these simple experiences would offer more to celebrate than any expensive vacation we spent scattered and mindless. This mentality of sensory appreciation might be the key to ecological sustainability and responsible consumption, in addition to allowing us to enjoy the magic of being alive. Unfortunately, it's also this appreciation for the present moment sensory experience that has been most co-opted from contemplative traditions into the language of advertising. It seems that everyone wants to be present with the richness of sensory experience, even Citibank. The teachings on karma, however, define the importance of being with the present moment in a much more psychological way, one that might not be quite so comfortable to face. From the standpoint of karma, being present is all about trust, trusting, vulnerability. Being vulnerable doesn't always feel like seeing an inspiring painting or taking a walk in nature. It is often a much more painful and awkward experience. The experience of fully feeling what it's like to step back onto the block where we were once bullied, to step back into a room where our heart was once broken. In the present moment, we might experience the habitual demons of our past in an intense and intimate way. To understand how karma relates to the present moment, we have to talk about something called the quote-unquote gap. The 6th through 10th of the 12 stages of a karmic pattern describe how our mind functions around this gap and how we work with this experience. Based on our past experiences and how they have primed us for the present moment, in the 6th step, our sense faculties come into contact, sparsha, with a new object of perception. So, let's say that as an adult, I meet someone with the same jawline or voice as my old bully. Whether or not I am presently aware that this is what is happening is another matter. You might just react with an aversion you can't place. As our conditioned consciousness comes into contact with this new experience, this new person who is not the old bully, a feeling inevitably arises, which is the seventh step. If we broke down the huge range of possible feelings to its simplest components, as the Buddha did in his earliest teachings on karma and mindfulness, we could say that this feeling is basically either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Of course, the range of possible feelings and impulses in reaction to seeing someone who reminds us of a bully would be much broader than that. Most likely, feelings of fear, nervousness, aversion, or rage would be right there, too. How we handle this seventh step, feeling, Vedana, is probably the most important aspect of the 12-step teaching on karma, because this is the very crux of meeting the present moment directly. This stage also offers a key insight into why mindfulness techniques are so important to our transformation. First of all, how we feel in the present moment is always based on past experience and conditioning. We cannot alter the reality of our feelings right now, not through any method. We can't avoid feeling scared or irritated by that person with the old bully's voice. For that matter, we can't avoid feeling turned on when cute person X enters a crowded room, or turned off when annoying person Y texts us yet again. We can't make ourselves like music we dislike just to try to impress somebody. Of course, we can pretend that we don't feel the way we do, but the practice of mindfulness is all about ending any pretense, at least to ourselves. Our mind is conditioned by the past, and to try to alter what we are feeling right now, especially in the name of being a compassionate spiritual person, is just wishful thinking. This is a crucial realization because we spend so much of life, and sadly so much of our spiritual paths, wishing we were feeling something other than what we are actually feeling in the present moment. This is especially true when we get caught in a mentality of spiritual materialism, which is all about the pretense of manipulating feelings into more blissful states. Maybe we wish we felt universal love, when actually we feel irritation. Or we wish we felt devotion to a guru, when actually we feel deep doubt. Or we long to be surrounded by rainbow explosions of insight, when actually all we have right now is a big fat dose of boredom. What if we stopped using all of the energy we spend trying to edit, tailor, and fabricate the right feelings, and converted that effort into awareness, noticing and acknowledging the feelings that we actually have? We would save a lot of energy, and we would develop real compassion for ourselves and others. This is the work of mindfulness meditation, the repeated practice of letting go of quote-unquote should and embracing quote-unquote is. The other crucial aspect of this seventh step of feeling is that it helps us to acknowledge how sensitive all sentient beings are. After all, sentient means possessing the ability to feel. Feeling is the defining characteristic of our humanity. The teachings say that the moment of feeling, meaning every moment of feeling, is actually an incredibly intense experience with which to be present. In traditional Buddhist art, each of the 12 karmic stages is depicted by an iconographic image. This moment of feeling, whether sensory or emotional, is depicted as a man stumbling around with an arrow piercing his eyeball. This depiction is used regardless of whether the experience we just came into contact with is one that we like or dislike, one of either attraction or aversion, or, for that matter, one of neutrality. Think about that for a minute. Even in experiencing a neutral feeling, a whatever moment of boredom you are being pierced in the eye by an arrow. As we become more aware, as we resensitize to our heart-mind, we recover an understanding of just how vulnerable to feeling we truly are. We are sensitive beings with sensitive hearts and sensitive nervous systems, and what happens to us in the present moment is intense. Even a simple sip of coffee is an intense experience when we bring our full attention to it. Every car horn affects us deeply, never mind the more quote-unquote noteworthy present moment experiences like the moment right after orgasm, the moment we get a standing ovation, or the moment we receive a heartbreaking text. During and just after the intensity of the impulse of feeling, there is a space, the gap that I referred to earlier, where we have not yet chosen how to react. This space is called a gap because it's a space of potential freedom placed in between. On the one hand, feeling the intensity of the moment, and, on the other, the next steps in the karmic chain of recurring habit. Step 8. Craving to react, Trishna, which means moving toward a response to what we are experiencing, and then step 9, choosing a reaction, Upadana, by employing one of our old strategies, or, alternatively, making a different choice. Maybe, with courage, we just shake the hand of the person who has the bully's voice rather than avoiding him. Once we react, step 10, future seeds of karma are planted, Bhava. This 10th step means that our choice to shake his hand will condition the way we experience a future encounter with someone bully-like. The more we are able to inhabit the gap now, the more likely that the seeds we plant will lead us to a more open future experience. Usually, when we think of a gap, we think of empty space. But the gap of the present moment is not a blank space at all. Within the gap, there is tremendous momentum and powerful energy. It is only called the gap because it represents the space of awareness in between feeling an intense impulse and choosing a reaction to it. Resting in the gap is the most difficult and vulnerable experience we can have, because when we actually show up for the present moment, we become infinitely more intimate with subtle intensity of feeling, both emotionally and physically, as well as with the strong momentum of habitual reactions we have chosen in similar situations in the past. Even if I am many years removed from being bullied, the anxiety and irritation I encounter when I see someone who reminds me of the bully are intense, if I'm willing to make myself available to them. This moment of availability, of trusting the wisdom of not reacting defensively, is what is called resting in the gap. The gap is not a bliss space, but a courageous space where we stay with what is happening within our mind and nervous system. Resting in the gap is a brave willingness to be vulnerable. It is that moment when we let ourselves feel again what we felt when we were being bullied way back in the day, and, for a moment, we dwell there. The gap is where I don't choose my scripted reaction of panicking and stepping away from this new bully-like person, or trying to sarcastically undercut him so that he won't mess with me. In the gap, we literally don't know what happens next, or how the world will respond to us without the rehashed profile we used to carry around. In this vulnerable space, it's sometimes not even clear if my old #me is going to survive at all. Without any kind of mindfulness training, this gap probably feels more like a crack in the sidewalk than any space we could actually inhabit with awareness. Without practice, we just rush on from impulse to reaction, steps 8 9, 10, forced violently along by what are traditionally called the winds of karma, reifying our habitual pattern without even realizing it. Even with practice, we often only notice the gap retroactively upon reflection, which is especially true if the moment of feeling in question was extra intense or triggering. This is why the practice of reflection is so important. It's also important to note that a master practitioner probably experiences the gap very differently from us. The most ancient tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, the Nyingma, has a very simple way of discussing the difference between enlightened beings, Buddhas, and confused and grasping sentient beings, zombie commuters. If we boil it all down, there are only two ways to experience the universe in the present moment. Resting in the gap between a habitual impulse and a chosen reaction, we experience the universe based on trust. We trust ourselves, and we trust the world. Whatever happens next, it's okay. We don't have to force a reaction in order to feel safe. This is how an enlightened being lives. If we always trusted that our mind could fully accommodate each moment, then no experience would ever have to be excluded, and we wouldn't need to defend ourselves against what happens next. Because a Buddha completely trusts her own mind. Curiosity comes naturally. A Buddha is actually curious about how the old bully is doing right now. With natural curiosity, the practice of mindfulness becomes effortless. When we actually start to want to be present, we start to care for everybody, so compassion becomes increasingly panoramic. As compassion expands, the mental barbed wire between yourself and your experience dissolves. Once that wall of duality crumbles, nothing can take you away from feeling at home in the universe, and no experience needs to be rejected as unworthy. This is what it really means to feel at home wherever you are. However, as commuters who are unable to rest in the gap, we necessarily experience the universe based on defensive strategy. The commuter's universe revolves around seeking security and defending against an ever-expanding array of possible threats. Habitual strategy, the force of karma, is what happens when experience becomes something we think we have to defend against. Karma is what we fabricate when we no longer trust the universe. If we wanted to simplify, it could be said that every technique of Buddhist meditation is preparing us to work with and become more comfortable in this space between feeling and reacting. Techniques of mindfulness awareness meditation help us to recognize the gap between impulse and reaction, aiding the difficult work of resting within that vulnerable space. Mindfulness also allows us to see how often we escape into all too familiar narratives in order to avoid feeling open and vulnerable. All other meditation practices build on the basic qualities of recognition developed in mindfulness awareness practice. Analytic meditations serve to clarify our view of the relationship between past and present. They also give us a better map of reality altogether, so that when we experience the next gap, we have a more accurate context for the experience. Techniques of loving kindness and compassion encourage us to become gentler toward both ourselves and others whenever the intensity of feeling arises, forgiving the fact that we all get caught in patterns to begin with. Compassion meditation helps us to empathize with the truth that every being is subject to confusion, reminding us that we are not alone in our journey and creating a less isolated inner space in which to experience the gap. With compassion, we become infinitely more willing to rest in the gap, because we realize that karma is nobody's fault. Tantric visualization techniques help us to gain a kind of heroic confidence that we can be much more in touch with our inherent wisdom than we think, so that we approach the gap with a sense of empowerment and capability. Direct meditations upon the nature of mind take us right to the very source code of thought, emotion, and perception. By directly seeing thoughts and habitual impulses as temporary visitors in the home of our awareness, we can learn to trust the gap so that we can slowly figure out how to act upon our thoughts and emotions only when helpful and necessary. Mipam has developed a very simple and potent meditation technique that he calls Shambhala meditation, which begins with the simple practice of feeling, deeply emphasizing the ability to rest without rejecting or grasping onto whatever we are actually feeling right now. While it sounds exceedingly simple, it's a technique that creates a trusting context for experiencing tenderness and vulnerability, the needed preparation for resting non-reactively in the gap and achieving liberation from past habits. Into the future, the practice of setting intention. The 11th and 12th stages of karma simply remind us that the world will respond to us based on the choices we make after the gap disappears. The 11th stage refers to the inevitable birth or arising of the world's response, jati, based on our reaction, a future moment in which we will have to face our karmic conditioning again, based on the reactive seeds that we planted in stages 8 through 10. In the future, we will have yet another chance to work with the gap. If we are completely unable to rest in the gap now, then our next experience of habitual mind will be more deeply ingrained. However, if we can glimpse, even for a moment, a non-reactive awareness within the gap, then the next time around we may be able to shift our response, even if only very slightly. The 12th stage refers to the eventual withering away and impermanence of any future karmic situation, jara marana. The 12th stage is a constant reminder of impermanence, the truth that we are never screwed. Rather than something morbid here, quote-unquote, death means that no future situation is ever fixed. Whatever habits are reified in the present moment, whatever the future outcome of our present practice or lack thereof, that situation too will be impermanent. Nothing will ever get stuck in place. There will always be another present moment in which we can meet, experience, fresh and new. And if we miss that next opportunity, there will be yet another moment. The practice we use to prepare for the future is the setting of intention, because the present moment is always a prelude to a future now. When we set intention, we contemplate what aspects of our experience we want to highlight in the near future. For example, you could simply end a morning meditation by saying, "Today I want to stay present with my bodily sensations when I feel bullied." By contemplating intention, we are more prepared to work with the next round of experience. We can never work in the future, we can work only for the future. Working in the future is the mistake made by the commuter who is always looking at the hopeful promise of a home ahead, and therefore never actually arrives anywhere. Working for the future is the practice of setting intention. One of my favorite things my friend and mentor, Acharya Eric Spiegel, has said is, quote, "If you set an intention, I can't guarantee that what you intend to happen will happen. There are no guarantees, but if you don't set an intention, I can guarantee that it won't happen." Unquote. Thus, checking in a little bit every day about our intention, perhaps at the end of a meditation session is one of the best methods we have for preparing for how karma will arise in the next now. We can also prepare for the future by taking our practice up off the meditation seat and into our daily life. This has been The Road Home, a contemporary exploration of the Buddhist path, written by Ethan Nichtern, read by Sen Naomi Kirst-Schultz. This was Chapter 2, Part 2, Karma. Thanks for listening.